Hello, it's Brett again. I wanted to show you some of my latest work on the CoCoBoot project. Uh, you see we booted up to a Coco 3, and we're going to load it off disk, and CoCoBoot's going to boot up using the DOS command, or you can actually auto-exec-bat it. It's important to note that the CoCoBoot project is a disk image. Don't try to load it as a basic file or as a bin file. It's actually a whole disk. It doesn't use exactly the RS-DOS file system. It actually uses its own file system, but what it does is it presents to you a boot up list of different profiles that I've set up for booting, and you can change the setup on the fly using the setup program. And if we hit setup, it'll load up the setup program, which will actually set up the CoCoBoot disk to automatically do or try to do what you're intending on doing as far as booting. And you can basically define different boot profiles that are basically different boot methods. And here we go to the main menu of the setup program, and we can change what system we have. If you watch the cursor there, we can change it as a Coco 2 or Coco 3. We can set a boot timeout. That's basically how many seconds it'll give you to hit any key to break out into the boot menu. If not, it'll auto boot. The next setting is we can actually turn off the auto boot setting, so it will not try to automatically boot. It'll always present a menu to you to boot from. In this case, we're going to auto boot, so we're not going to defeat it. And then we got some profiles here. We can set up profiles one at a time. And let's just go into I think an easy one. Let's go into the Super IDE driver. Now this won't actually work on my, this is actually a virtual Coco, so I don't actually have a Super IDE, but it actually may work. I'm not sure. I'm using DriveWire and HDB, but what's kind of cool about this is as we modify our protocols, we actually have, or profiles I should say, we actually have, I'm going to hit M here. You should see the highlighted ASCII character is, just hit that on the keyboard and it'll float through your different options. And we have different ways of booting. We can replicate a DOS command. We can replicate a HDB loader, which basically loads a bunch of different flavors of HDB into the memory. We can load an external ROM. That's great if you're trying to boot a Super IDE or just something simply that's in a particular MPI slot switch. We can also do an OS9 boot, which is just extremely experimental right now. Right now I'm just basically playing with trying to get the OS9 driver loaded to where old CoCoBoot1 was, which was basically directly loading OS9 boot from a right from hard drive without having to actually use the normal Nitros bootloader, which kind of stinks actually. But and so we have just basically 4 different ways of booting, but that's kind of deceiving because it reboots into another system. It may do some more complicated stuff for you, but basically right now, let's look at the HDB loader, because this is probably one of the more interesting ones to look at, one of the more complex ones. We can set up a tag, and you see the tag is nothing more than the text value that's displayed to you at the prompt, so you know which profile's which. The disk ROM image is kind of interesting. I'm going to hit D here, and it's going to go to a submenu, and we're actually going to be able to using the cursor keys. I think just back and forth work right now. Yeah, up and down don't work. But you can basically scroll through the different flavors of DriveWire that are actually right on the CoCoBoot disk itself. It actually loads the different kinds of HDB into memory, into RAM memory, from the disk. And it actually has all the available flavors of HDB can be patched in right at boot up. So you don't have to worry about what you're driving if you have a weird TC3 controller or whatever this LR Tech thing is. I mean, I don't really know what half this hardware is, but you can see all the drive wires are all over the place here. But in this particular case, we want to boot up to the LBA because that's our actual Super IDE drive is the LBA. At boot up, we can also specify an MPI switch to set. So if you're if your Super IDE drive is in slot 2, you can specify that, and CoCoBoot will take care of switching this drive slot for you at boot up. The device address is nothing more than if you have a like a non-standard Super IDE interface setting. You can actually specify which address to use. If your Glenside controller, this also works for Glenside too, of course, the LBA controller. You can also specify, probably have a misnomer here, the OS9 offset. That's actually the HDB offset. OS9 demands that it starts at LSN 0 and HDB can be offset from that. This is actually the HDB offset. I just have a misnomer. I just screwed up my programming on it. It's just I flipped the... Anyway. I just flipped the object around with the proper name. So the right function, the wrong name. Default ID, you can actually set up the default device ID for in particular the hard drives. So you can actually boot up to the IDE drive 1, let's say, or SCSI device 5. You can actually change that with this default ID. You just hit E and change it. You go boop and you change it. I want to drive from 2. But in this case, we're going to keep it 0 because I only have drive 0. And this is kind of neat here too. When it boots up HDB, it'll patch in the proper drivers into HDB, initialize those drivers, and then proceed to defeat the auto boot. So that way you can't get into a weird boot cycle where CoCoBoot's your first disk and it just keeps booting itself over and over again, because it is a disk program. As long as you have some sort of disk program, you can basically get it to work. It won't load from ROM or cassette tape right now because that's just kind of beyond the project at this point. But anyway, we just hit break to go back to the main menu, and if we want to save our changes, we hit write config, and we're not actually going to write the config because I don't want to change my settings here. And you see we have different ones. Like I have my experimental OS9 booter. Let's go to that. We see we have that's actually a real OS9 booter. That actually is a DOS command that loads OS9. Let me change that right now. There. I think it actually works, and it'll boot it off of drive 2. And I think that works. Last time I tried it. Oops. I guess I should probably name it right. OS9. Okay. And we are going to actually write that config change. And we can reboot, of course, by hitting R. And at the main menu, you can also go to subprograms, which I don't really have a lot of them right now. I really want to make a disk copy program. I have one that works off cassette interface, but I want to make one that works off the CoCoBoot menu to where you can actually copy disks around from HDB to HDB, so on and so forth. That way you can actually get things from DriveWire to the hard drive and stuff pretty easily. And my CoCoBoot system actually dynamically loads HDB, so it patches in a file depending on which device you decide to use. So I know it sounds kind of weird, but that's the way I was able to fit all those different flavors of HDB right onto the disk. You know, a regular old double density single-sided disk. If we go to HDB exam, I hit X here. This will give us, this was basically a utility I wrote for myself to make sure I didn't screw up all my hard drives and stuff. You can actually flip through the Super IDE. I don't know, what do you call it? You can flip through the Super IDE bank, the ROM banks, at will. And you can also specify, again, the address to use for the Super IDE controller. You can flip the MPI switch right here and now by hitting M. I don't really actually have an MPI switch. Actually, I do have an MPI switch because this is an emulator. But what's going to happen is... Oh, wow. Well, that's not supposed to happen. Somehow I got to orchestra. I think it's because I'm using an emulator I'm not used to using. But we can always just reboot. And now, if your system auto boots, that's really cool. It'll just go right into CoCoBoot, but there's no way to really auto boot with just a standard stock disk extended color boot, color basic. So I just hit DOS. It's the simplest way I can figure out how to do it. So it does boot using DOS. And let's boot up to Becker. I'm going to hit 0 there, and it'll boot up my Becker protocol. And now I will have the Becker protocol. So if I go to drive 0, as you can see, CoCoBoot is properly labeled in the disk directory. It only has one file. It's autoexec bat file. It will boot up. You can actually load that using BASIC. That's not the preferred way of doing it. Actually, the DOS command works the best. It's the easiest and simplest. And if we go to drive 2, or drive 1, I should say, I have Lewis's really cool disk surfer. If I can remember how to do it. There it is. Oh, oh. Well, that does not work at all. Did I not do it right? That's an error 4. I must have a screwed up thing. Hey, there we go. I don't know why that doesn't work, but there's a lot of bugs. But as you see, I can actually go through and rename his file. His utility is really awesome. I don't really want to show you too much of his utility because it makes mine look like crap as far as user interface goes. But you can see the CoCoBoot is actually properly labeled, and that's our autoexec bat file. And if you hit it, if you boot into it, it'll go right back into CoCoBoot2. And we're going to break out of that and go to the setup. Oh, we're using the CoCoBoot now. We're not using the drive wire anymore. That's right. We're actually on hard drive now. We're on slow drive wire, I should say. Anyway, other things you can do with the profiles, let's take a look here. We can boot an external ROM, and that means we can also change the MPI switch when we go to boot up the ROM so we can get to the right ROM. Again, the device address is handy for changing the flash bank. I don't actually remember how I programmed that. I think that just works with the SDA, with the Super IDE from Cloud9. I don't actually have support for the SDC yet, but it looks really easy to do, and I'll get right on it because it seems like that's getting very popular to have one of those. I don't own one yet, so it's not priority to me. But that's it. So sort of a mini little dynamic boot up program you can use for your Coco. So any questions, comments, concerns, give me an email and I'll send you a disk image if you like. Thanks. Bye-bye.